So we've come all the way down the River Avon from Avon Mouth, from the mouth of the Avon, to the next place where you can cross it, which is at the Clifton Suspension Bridge. It's not the first place you can cross on the M5 over what's called the Avonmouth Bridge now. But we decided that the Clifton Suspension Bridge would be a much nicer way to complete this coast route. But we now need to make our way back along the other side of the River Avon.
Hello and welcome back to our trip around the English and Welsh coastline on our Honda VFR1200X Crosstourer. Have you missed me? Or had you not even realised that he's been doing all the talking for the last 2 episodes? Hopefully he hasn't lost too many subscribers. Well, we're nearly there. No more estuaries or big rivers to cross. We've actually just entered our home county of North Somerset. Stick around to hear about a little-known village with an interesting past.
But we'll be popping off of it very shortly to go down to the village of Pill. Not particularly known other than by the locals. Odd little village, is actually very fascinating and has some interesting history. Well, I'm not sure if it's a fact or a myth. I'm pretty sure it's a fact, to be honest with you. But once upon a time, Pill could lay claim to having the most pubs per capita, per population. Drinking was, and dare I say still is, something very dear to the inhabitants of Pill. Pill also has an annual event that they call the Pill Rag, but don't be misled, it's nothing to do with Rag Week that you would get on a university campus. I'm not sure why they call it Pill Rag, but they do. It's really just an opportunity, particularly for the residents of Pill, to have a good old knees up. Not many people know about it outside. Used to be back in the day, the youths from Portishead would go to pick on the youths from Pill, and there used to be fights. Dare I say, even some of the more grown-up fellows. I think before we go down into the village, we should have a quick look at Ham Green. These modern houses are built on the site of a hospital, an infectious diseases hospital. So people used to come back from abroad, and they used to come, if they were suspected of having infectious diseases, they would have to come to a hospital like this. And a couple of the buildings, the old buildings, still exist. That's an original building. Not many of them. There's an original building. There were 2 of those buildings here, and the whole place was self-contained. And although there were a few substantial brick buildings like the one I just pointed out, most of it was in wooden huts that stood in quite a lot of isolation. There'd be like, I don't know, 20 metres, maybe even more than that between the huts. You say, because you know a bit more about it than me.
Where do I start? It's a long and fascinating story that I recommend you spend more time researching for yourself, so I'll keep it brief. This is Ham Green House. Today it provides cancer care. It dates back 300 years and is clearly no ordinary building. Bristol's economy boomed in the 18th century. The men at the top of the chain grew exceedingly rich. They simply called themselves merchants. They turned Bristol's port into a busy and vibrant trading post. They used their wealth to build grand houses in the city, but that wasn't enough for some, so they also built houses along the River Avon, often with views over the river so they could observe their ships coming and going. But there was a dark side. A lot of their wealth was built on the misery of others, particularly Africans who were taken as slaves and forced to work in inhumane conditions on plantations in the Caribbean, which was then referred to as the West Indies. Because it was thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean, the merchants in Bristol didn't have to face the misery. In 1772, slavery had been deemed unlawful in England, but these wealthy merchant families would sometimes bring slaves over to use as servants. To circumnavigate the law, the slaves were made to sign waivers that made them indentured servants while in Britain. I'm not sure if there were any at Ham Green House, but it's likely. Several generations of merchant families associated with the house owned plantations in Jamaica. Despite their money, influence and huge resistance, after decades of campaigning and 2 Acts of Parliament, slavery in the British Empire was eventually abolished on the 1st of August 1834. The wealthy merchants, no doubt helped by tens of millions of pounds in compensation, adapted. Ham Green House, the Jamaican plantations and a lot of other properties in this area were handed down through bloodlines and marriage, but always stayed within a tight circle of elite families spawned by those original merchants. As time moved on, Ham Green House became surplus to requirements and in 1894 was eventually acquired by Bristol Corporation, and it became an isolation hospital, later enlarged as a sanatorium. The hospital opened in 1899 as an isolation hospital, mainly taking care of typhoid cases. It had 76 beds. It was ideally situated in large grounds, far enough away from the local population while still having access to services. It was also close to a port, often the point of entry for disease. By 1907, it had grown to 185 beds. By 1927, it had grown to 235 beds. Throughout this period, while smallpox and typhoid had been initial drivers for the hospital, the major illnesses treated were scarlet fever and diphtheria. It later developed into a sanatorium for patients with pulmonary tuberculosis and had 200 beds. Despite the high probability of death, rigorous treatment regime that included daily lumbar punctures and being bedridden for months on end, survivors somehow fondly recall their experiences and the kindness of the staff. In the 1950s, it pioneered mechanical ventilation in respiratory failure during the poliomyelitis epidemics and opened the first intensive care unit in Bristol, 8 years before the Bristol Royal Infirmary. In the 1960s, it led the development of hemodialysis for acute renal failure. Demand for infectious diseases beds declined in the 60s and 70s. The hospital took on a more conventional role, but sadly closed in 1997. I loved my time here.
Everything had to be self-contained, even their water source, because they didn't want to contaminate. So they built this reservoir there to provide water for the hospital. But it's got a special place in our hearts, hasn't it? Because when we met, Esther was working here as a student nurse. And she was in student accommodation. You were in the other block. You weren't in this one. Your block got taken down, didn't it? But the block you were in looked exactly the same. And it did limp on, didn't it, for many years as just a clinic type hospital. I'm looking for it now. There, that's it. That was it. Yeah, that was yeah. Look, it's all boarded up. That's a shame, isn't it? Now we can be sneaky here, can't we? We can get away with this. Oh, we can have a quick look-see down here, you wanted. Well, Somerset Lodge, I think it's still perhaps operating. Okay, so there's still something going on here, isn't there? Yeah, that little section, yeah, and the buildings, yeah, some of these are still, yeah, that looks old as well. We're reminiscing now though, aren't we? And I'm not sure how much you're going to enjoy listening to us go on about the old days. So, that was our little diversion to Ham Green. We can see in the distance there the Avonmouth Bridge that we didn't come across, the M5 motorway bridge. Now we're coming down into the village of Pill, which I spoke a little bit about earlier, and we're going to go into the heart of the village here, I suppose, and the main road goes through, but this is the interesting bit around here, isn't it? What they call the Arches, which carries the railway from Bristol to Portishead. Not operating all the way to Portishead at the moment, mind you. And then you've got this 1960s development. I think there were slums there before that they pulled down. And if we go here, I'm not quite sure how good your eyesight is, but can you read what it says there? The Owls of Pill. Oh, no, that's not the stone. The stone's a bit further up, actually, the memorial to the, we can look it up.
At this rate, we're not going to get much beyond Pill in this episode, but there's just so much to say about this little known place. Let's start with its reputation. In 1755, John Wesley, the Methodist leader, wrote, "I rode over to Pill, a place famous from generation to generation for stupid, brutal, abandoned wickedness." In the same year, Charlotte Charke wrote, "The place itself is not unpleasant if it were inhabited by any other kind of people than the savages whom infest it." While we're on Methodism, the monument I was talking about is a plaque dedicated to Francis Asprey and Thomas Coke, who sailed from here in the 1700s with others to spread Methodism to the United States. In 1984, 800 American Methodists visited the site for the dedication of the memorial. Pill was a magnet for sailors looking for a drink, and the locals were only too happy to take their money. As well as the 21 pubs, residents would sell alcohol from their front doors. Those days are gone, but there's still a rough edge here. It's not intimidating, in fact it's quite an endearing charm. Although there aren't nearly as many pubs nowadays, prepared to be checked out by the locals, they can tell an outsider from a mile away.
And there on the left is the Star Inn, one of the pubs that's left. Obviously Pill doesn't have as many pubs as it had before, but it's still got a few. Now I suppose the housing gives you an idea of the type of place this is. And there's a big old pub coming up on the left hand side, facing the river, the Duke of Cornwall. Sailing Club headquarters and Marine Parade. Just the other side of the wall is the River Avon.
The village was traditionally home to pilots who would guide boats up the treacherous Avon Gorge into the port of Bristol. They also used to venture to the west of Lundy, seeking homeward bound ships in all winds and weathers to bring safely up the channel to Bristol, as well as taking ships outbound. In 1873 there were 74 licensed pilots and 45 boats, each and every one working from the creek at Pill, and each pilot came from a Pill family. The pilots were highly skilled seamen and went to sea in skiffs to meet the ships and guide them in. The pilot skiffs, also known as cutters, were mostly built in Pill and were famous for their seaworthiness, speed and ability to be handled by one man. Steam-powered craft eventually took over, and the last pilot ceased operating in 1923. The Pill Hobblers assisted the pilots by hauling the boats along the river, either in rowing boats or by hand along the towpath. They would also transfer cargoes from larger vessels that were unable to navigate the River Avon onto smaller boats. They were hard, skilled men, and it was as dangerous work as piloting. They still exist and provide maritime services today. Many of Pill's residents are descendants of the pilots and hobblers and still work at Avonmouth and Portbury docks. People born in Pill are known as sharks, with many having tattoos to signify the fact. The community spirit here is strong. I mentioned the Pill Rag earlier, but there's also a regatta that dates back to 1835, but don't expect anything like Henley. Events are very much in-house and organic. A few movers and shakers organise things and the residents go along with it. Fair play to them, and long may it continue.
Big community spirit here, and as well as it being the village of Pill, there's Easton in Gordano, there's Ham Green, and there's even a little place called Crockham. I think Crockham is part of Pill. The area around the Pill. So that was Pill.
And this is the end of the episode. See you next time, when we'll show you around the town where we lived for 25 years.